Welcome everyone to today's webinar session of the CISI. We're honoured to do this in collaboration with the University of Central Lancashire and the Institute of Certified Public Accountants in Cyprus. This is the final webinar of a series of webinars which we've done in collaboration together, and it's been a delight. Thank you for everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate the time that you have taken, and hopefully we'll have some fun as well as learning something together. Now, I'm just the warm-up act. You've got other people who are waiting to take over and take you through the meat of the session. I just want to do a quick introduction and they can introduce themselves much better than me. So ladies first, let me start with Stéphanie. Stéphanie, if you could just say a quick hello, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Cyprus. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, Amrita, Petros, Kyriakos, and all the participants. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. My name is Stéphanie Shaelou. I am a professor of European Law and Reform. I'm the head of the School of Law here at the University of Central Lancashire in Cyprus. And I'm also the director of a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on the rule of law and European values. So I look forward to being able to engage with you. I'm also a CISI member, so it's good to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stéphanie. Amrita, if you can just say a quick hello, introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Petros. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. My name is Amrita. I'm the Professional Standards and Ethics Manager at the CISI, and we'll be working on a Speak Up and Listen Up presentation shortly.
Thank you, Amrita. And Kyriakos.
Thank you, Petros. It is indeed a pleasure to be this afternoon with you and conclude the series of the webinars. I'm Kyriakos Iordanou. I'm the General Manager of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Cyprus.
Thank you, Kyriakos. So I'll just share my screen now, and if someone can just confirm that they can see what I can see. That's great. So we're going to have a Speak Up, Listen Up session. We're going to be looking at 3 case studies. Amrita will be leading us through that, and discussions for each case study will be enhanced by Stéphanie and Kyriakos. My name is Petros Florides. I'm a member of the board of the CISI, co-founder of the National Advisory Council here in Cyprus. And again, thank you for joining us today. So very quickly, for those people who are members and those people who are not members joining us, the CISI has approximately 45,000 members in 100 plus countries. We have about 40,000 exams per year in about 80 countries. There is lots of resources for members. So if you are not a member of the CISI already, then please think about joining us. We have over 500 CISI TV videos. This will be part of that plus that you see behind the 500. We have something like 200 professional refresher modules, 24 UK branches, national advisory councils worldwide, number 9, of course, including Cyprus. We have been here for over 10 years, and we have something like 500 annual events for our members. So again, please, if you're not already a member, go into our website and consider joining us and being part of the CISI family. Our mission statement, you'll see here, I won't read off the screen, but integrity is at the heart of our mission. And we need to make sure that we as CISI members actually walk the talk and show integrity in everything that we do. Now, anyone that works in the financial services industry should find this graph heart-rendering, because you can see that the Edelman Trust looks at, or the Edelman Barometer actually looks at all the different industries in terms of the trust put in those industries. And in case you're looking for financial services, it's the one that is consistently bottom of all the other professions. So we are the least trusted profession of all the ones that Edelman looks at, except in 2023, when social media made an entrance. And luckily, we are more trusted than social media, but less trusted than all the other professions. So this should really break our hearts for everyone who works in financial services, because of course, core to what we do is to earn the trust of our clientele and wider stakeholder base. So this is something that we all are part of, and we need to all do what we can within our sphere of influence to improve things. Now, here's another look in terms of trust. And you can see we are, if you use bankers as a proxy for financial services generally, again, we are least trusted than the average man or woman on the street. Again, for an industry, for a profession that relies on the trust that clientele put in us, then this isn't a good position to be. Now, this is the results of Transparency International, and you can see here again, Cyprus on the far left, this is the percentage of people who think corruption increased in the previous 12 months. So we have a highest level of increase in corruption as perceived by the people who were surveyed. Now, this Transparency International survey focuses more on the public sector than on the private sector, but it's still part of the general social milieu, if you like. And here, one final one in terms of institutions that are trusted or not, where we think corruption would exist. Again, we are only as financial services, if we use bankers again as a proxy for the wider industry, we are trusted only more than politicians. So we have a lot of work to do as professionals in this industry. We have to own this reality and do everything that we can within our sphere of influence to be a positive influence. Now, there is a very good graphic that the CISI uses to actually show what we consider to be professional. And professionalism is a combination of three component parts. The first one is knowledge. This is what you gain in terms of your initial competence to do your job through your exams. But then that knowledge has to be applied within the right context in the right way. And the knowledge has to be consistently updated. And this is what the CISI consider to be skills, continuing professional development and ongoing learning to make sure that you can apply your knowledge correctly within the context and situation which you find yourself. So knowledge, absolutely, facts and figures, but the real skill is how you apply that knowledge in terms of the facts and figures. And then finally, behavior, last but in no means least. Now, this is upholding the highest standards of integrity. And of course, integrity, a shorthand definition, would be walking the talk by signing up to a professional body's code of conduct. Now, one way of looking at this schema is from the top down, and you can see how there are three squares overlapping, and only when you have all three are you professional. I prefer to see it as a sideways view, not a top-down view, not the bird's eye view, but actually from the side. And the way I see the schema is that behavior actually is the foundation stone for everything else. So your knowledge and skills sits on a bedrock of right behavior, because you may have the knowledge and skills, but if you misbehave and exploit those knowledge and skills, then we are not going to have integrity, and we're going to be losing the trust of our clientele and wider stakeholder base. So that's how I prefer to see this particular schema, this graphic, where our knowledge and skills, which are fundamental, of course, but that sits on a foundation, on a bedrock of behavior. So with that, I am now going to hand over to the main event. Amrita, you're invited now to take over. I will stop sharing and please proceed.
Super. Thank you so much, Petros. That was a great insight into the topic that we're going to be covering today, which is speaking up. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me just 1 second when I do. There we go. You can see it? Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Amrita Bhogal. I'm the Professional Standards and Ethics Manager at the CISI. And as Petros mentioned, we are going to be focusing today on speaking up and listening up. Now, you would have already seen this slide just from Petros's, and what is really important, as he mentioned, is that behavior element, especially now. We're going to be looking at, ways in which the highest standards of integrity can be continued by signing up to professionals' code of conduct. Now, here I have some images. You may recognize some people, you may not, but each of these individuals have a really interesting role within the Speak Up whistleblowing process. On the left, I have Dr. Li Wen Liang, who is the ophthalmologist who shared information on coronavirus in Wuhan. So he actually raised that concern, also blew through Twitter and actually let everybody know what the situation was. We then have Michael Woodford, who's the former Olympus president who uncovered the company's 1.7 billion accounting scandal after taking over quickly as CEO. And then you have Elizabeth Holmes on the bottom right, who's a Theranos founder, who was convicted maybe last year of defrauding investors with healthcare innovation. And this innovation specifically looked at detecting healthcare issues. Now, the difference between Elizabeth and the other two are if somebody within the organization actually did raise a concern and actually did speak up, the organization wouldn't be in the situation that it is right now. So what we're actually looking at today is speaking up. Now, this term actually has different names. Sometimes it's called whistleblowing, sometimes it's called raising a concern. In Cyprus, it's specifically called whistleblowing, as there's recently been a law that's passed on it. But in principle, it basically means an opportunity to highlight a concern when you're unsure about what the best course of action is in order for it to be improved. So really, no matter what you call it, the principle is exactly the same. It's about raising the concern. It's about highlighting that issue that you want to highlight. Now, on the flip side of that is listening up. So where one side you have someone raising the concern, actually speaking up, then you have the receiving end where an individual is listening up. And most of the times, in many cases, it's the managers or individuals who acknowledge, escalate, and log the concern, which can be followed up on. And what we'll do is we'll come back to these, and these will be highlighted in some of the work that we're going to be doing a little bit later on. Some examples of where individuals may feel it's important, or maybe examples of where speak up has actually happened is in financial malpractice, health and safety, breach of policies, confidentiality, data protection, and bribery and corruption. Now here I have a quote from Anita Dimitrou, who was then the president of the House of Representatives in Cyprus. And she specifically says, legislation on whistleblowers protection places an obligation for the competent authorities to designate independent and autonomous external channels for receiving and managing information, as well as an obligation to process such information. So really, it highlights that the process, the steps are there, the legislation is there. What now is important is for the onus on individuals, for the onus on organizations to actually ensure that the process now continues to be put in place and that is continuously looked at. Again, you would have seen this. It's highlighting from the Aidem and Trust Barometer survey where financial services actually sits on, and Petros very well highlighted that it's not as low as social media within the respondents that were actually highlighted. But in order for financial services to almost be trusted better, that importance of raising a concern and having that trust within the organization will be benefited. There'll be more trust within organizations, within financial services, and for financial services. So the public trust will also hopefully increase if there is a better onus, a better understanding of the importance of raising a concern and having that transparency. So some of the things about speaking up and listening up that are quite helpful. Speaking up, it makes people feel good and can sometimes stop harm. There is more responsibility, it enhances company culture and can make it more an inclusive workplace. Similarly, listening up on the receiving end, it's very much, you can build a place, deliver better business knowledge. You know what you don't know, and there's a level of enhanced trust. So here are some corporate examples of where speaking up actually, some corporate examples of what we have. So Wells Fargo, in 2016, the US bank was fined $185 million by the US Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for illegally opening accounts to boost sale targets. Now, 2 million bank accounts or credit accounts were opened without customer knowledge or permission. And that means that the company put staff under pressure to hit those aggressive sales targets, and they fired 5,300 people in the process. Now, this was a really, really big scandal. John Stumpf, at the time chief executive, said that, we recognize that we should have done more sooner to eliminate the unethical conduct or those incentives, and how certain incentives may have unintentionally encouraged that level of conduct. Now, Wells Fargo, even today, are still having, it's that reputational risk and the reputational damage that we can see even today. Similarly, we've got VW Dieselgate, where many of you will know VW actually sold diesel cars with engines fitted in with defeat devices. This was so that they could detect when they were being tested and also change the performance to improve their results, cheating those emission tests. Now, 11 million cars worldwide were fitted with that level or that defeat device. And VW have actually paid 40 billion euros as a result and continue to pay even more. One of the board members at the time said, they're looking at problems which aren't hidden but can be openly communicated to superiors. And he says, we need a culture in which it is possible and permissible to argue with your superior about the best way to go. And this is actually really, really important. That word culture is embedded within organizations and can sometimes be used as a term that is just overused sometimes. Culture is really, really important when you are looking at raising a concern and speaking up, because if you don't have a positive culture embedded within your organization, it's only going to be more difficult. And it takes time to build that positive culture. And we've seen many examples where the culture within an organization actually has such a fundamental impact into what has actually happened with issues. So what I'm going to be doing now is inviting you to join with your phone QR code from this slide. And what we do have now is a series of dilemmas, which would be great for you all to vote on. So what you can do is join on the QR code on the right-hand side if you just take a picture of it. Alternatively, you can open up another browser, or on your phone, just go onto slido.com with the hashtag CISI. And when the opportunity comes for it, we'll be able to vote on what the correct option that you think would be to do for the dilemma. So the first dilemma that we're going to be looking at is fly on the wall. Now, this dilemma is when attending a company training day, Andrea overhears a loud conversation between two senior colleagues from Blue Branch who are boasting about ignoring the firm's rules, drafted to local regulations on handling complaints. They use stalling tactics with customers who complain, offer very low compensation, and only deal with complaints seriously if the customer threatens to escalate the matter. They reckoned that they were saving thousands of euros towards the targets by using this approach. Whilst Andrea remains anxious at what she's heard, she doesn't really want to be thought of as a snitch. So here you have Andrea, who's overheard a conversation, and basically she's heard that individuals might be using stalling tactics with customers. So she's concerned about this. She worries about what the firm policy is and whether it's being breached. So what do you think she should do? So there's 4 options. First option, to report her concerns using the firm's confidential whistleblowing email address or hotline. Option B is to keep her concerns to herself, as what she has overheard was said in a private conversation between 2 staff members working at the branch. Option C is to report her concerns to the area manager, who oversees Andrea's branch and Blue Branch, or the last option, to report her concerns to her manager. So I'll just go back, just if you wanted to have another quick read, and then what we'll do is we'll open up the voting, and then you can use that voting on your phone or on another browser, and we'll be able to see how those votes have come through. So I'll give you a few seconds to do so, and whilst this is happening, Kyriakos, I might come to you first, just to get your thoughts initially on the dilemma.
Well, thank you, Amrita. it's interesting case. I think that's something that might happen possibly quite often in various companies, that is someone listening to what others might say by chance, by accident, and then finding him or herself in a difficult situation as to decide the way forward. Well, presumably, the company should have put in place, established an internal system for reporting, whistleblowing, and encouraging whistleblowing. So, given that, and I'm making my references vis-a-vis the local legislation we've got, that every company is obligated to have an internal reference procedure, is to go through that procedure and report it. On the other hand, something that I think is not very clear, and maybe I will ask and get, let's say, for example, proposes some responses. What is Andrea's position in the company? Is she a regular staff? Is she of a specific status? Because that might change a bit the way she could act. Yeah. So if I assume that she's a regular staff, so with limited, let's say, managerial duties, obviously she could be in a more difficult situation in deciding what to do. Definitely doing nothing is not probably an option. So it's something that we may need to cross out. Possibly she could go through the whistleblowing process and report it. And in my opinion, what I usually tend to say when we have similar circumstances is that usually that person that has to take a serious decision should get an advice, probably by someone of trust and by someone that could give her some objective guidance as to how to do it. If the relationship with the manager, who most probably is not the responsible manager of the Blue Branch, is good, then she could have that talk with him. The problem is that if we take into consideration that the stalling process, the fact that the Blue Branch is not dealing with the complaints as they should have done, that has another of consequences on the company per se as a whole, and not just to improve the statistics or the results of the specific branch. Possibly this could lead to a reputational issue for the company. So the problem might escalate than just not following up a policy, or it could give rise to serious damages or liabilities should that materialize, or should that inappropriate, let's say, activity by the Blue Branch colleagues goes on, and possibly they could come into next year's financial results or customer results. So my advice to her is to have a discussion with her manager first, and given the risks that this inappropriate practice by the other colleagues might give rise to, the internal whistleblowing process would be the most preferable route.
Thank you. You raised quite a few relevant points within the dilemma that we need to be thinking about. Just before I go to you, Stephanie, I'm just going to see what the temperature of our meeting right now is. So we have 63% of individuals who said, Andrea should report the concern to her firm's confidential whistleblowing email address or hotline. They're changing. The next, we've got option D. 20% of individuals said, we should report she should report her concerns to her manager. And option C, to report her concerns to the area manager who's overseeing Andrea's branch at Blue Branch. This is really interesting because I think every time that this has been delivered, the weights are always a little bit different. Stephanie, can I come to you now? Why is it that you think, do you think that the option A, to report the concerns to the whistleblowing hotline, do you think for some individuals, it might be seen as too draconian, too much of a extreme option?
Thank you, Amrita. Well, since we've had the results of the poll, I'm going to turn directly to this because I'm also surprised that answer A is the preferred one. I was going to give a slow introduction to, why we need whistleblowing frameworks in place, but I think that it's clear that we need whistleblowing frameworks in place. So I just wanted to say that there are a number of resources, including through the CISI, that you can actually, turn to in order to understand better the learning objectives of this webinar, which is not only to explain why effective whistleblowing arrangements are necessary in any organization for good governance. Second objective is to evaluate why problems in any organization must be detected or must not go undetected, and that anyone who comes across such a problem should not feel uncomfortable about raising concerns about bad practices and suspected wrongdoing. I think we all agree with this. But also the third objective is to look at speak up, listen up, raising concerns, and whistleblowing. Now, later in the other scenarios, I may turn to what happens if you belong to a regulated profession. Well, we can leave this for now. What I wanted to share with you for now, which is, I think is very relevant to what we can see on the screen, is the guidance that is published on the website of an institution that is called Protect in the UK, which is the former Public Concern at Work institution. And I will read and quote what they have on their website, which I think is very relevant to what we're discussing now. So the guidance is to individuals with whistleblowing concerns. And the first piece of advice is that you should, of course, consider whether your firm has a whistleblowing policy. This is the first thing that Kyriakos mentioned when he did his intervention. The second one, which is very important, and I quote, let the facts speak for themselves. Do not try to come up with your own narrative of things, and do not become personally involved either. So that's the first piece of advice. Separate personal grievances from matters of wider concern. And I will come back to what constitutes wider concern. Number 4, you are a witness, not a complainant. So you need to communicate in a calm, non-adversary, non-aggressive, professional manner. It's also important. And then number 5, there is no need for you to conduct your own investigation. Quite on the contrary, this could come up, come back to you as a sort of boomerang effect. And then one piece of advice, which I think many people, especially regulated professionals, will share, is that you need to do your risk assessment before you speak up. So think about the risks and the outcomes of potential actions before acting, so that you are not exposed to something that you cannot handle anymore. You may be mistaken. or there may be a reasonable explanation as to what you have heard or what you have seen. So this is something perhaps you need to consider. Be aware of the fact that you may not be thanked for what you will do, and that you will actually not be treated as a hero. I think that we have examples of famous whistleblowers worldwide who were the victims of their own process. And finally, for the moment, and then I will return to some of those advice, but for the moment, consider seeking external advice from another source. So that external advice can be within the organization. It could be a union member, for example, or a member of an advisory body, or the HR department, or it could be an external advisor, such as a lawyer. I will stop there for the moment, and I hope that I helped a little bit the debate. I think that, as Kyriakos mentioned before, it's important not to escalate too quickly and to consider well, what we call moral dilemmas within ethical behaviors acceptable at the organization and worldwide. But we will come back to that later.
Super, thank you so much. What we will do now is almost continue with this dilemma in a part 2 section. So what's happened is Andrea is concerned, and obviously she's worried about the firm policy. And of the respondents, everybody in their dilemma, everybody in the call right now voted for option A. But let's say that this was not the option that we continued with. Let's say that we decided that Andrea should report her concerns to her manager. So she didn't report it to the confidential whistleblowing email address or hotline just yet. She's not decided just to almost keep it to herself. And she's not decided to report it forward to her area manager. So if we continue with this dilemma as is, Andrea's line manager says, leave it with me. Considerable time has passed, and Andrea hears nothing further despite asking several times. The quarterly operational loss shows that Blue Branch are reporting demonstrably lower losses than other branches. Losses due to complaints are low at Blue Branch, but further detail isn't given. Andrea believes that Blue Branch figures are good, which are direct result of unethical stalling tactics. The area manager isn't due to visit Andrea's branch for another 2 weeks, and Andrea is worried that Blue Branch figures may be used in one of the regular internal success stories, but she doesn't really know when the next one is due to be sent out. So within this dilemma, she overheard what she overheard, and she's decided to not go through any of the other channels other than just to raise it with her manager. So it has been risen with her manager, and the manager has just basically said, all right, it's fine, I will deal with it. The manager is in the listen up process and saying, that's fine, leave it with me. But she actually hasn't heard anything else. And the losses, the operational losses kind of indicate that maybe it could still be happening. So to everybody in the call, I raise the options with you again. She's concerned and she's really worried about what the next step is. So your voting is open. What should she do now? So this is almost the part 2 of the dilemma. And what I want to highlight within this dilemma is, she has almost, while she has raised the issue, it's one of the things, as we've already mentioned, it's quite difficult to do. She's raised a concern, she's highlighted that there is an issue that takes a lot of moral courage, as we've already spoken about, as Stéphanie and Kyriakos have both mentioned. And what is it that we think that the next step is to be done? I want to just raise one of my just a question. This is probably for you, Kyriakos, on culture. What does this almost say about the culture of the organization? If we're in an organization where she's really struggling to find out what the next step is, it almost highlights the importance of that raising a concern journey. She's raised a concern, but nothing has happened. And in many cases that we see within people raising concerns on whistleblowing, sometimes there's no further information that's been received. There is that disconnect in communication. So when people actually do raise a concern, they don't hear anything back. And if this is one of the cases. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on, the culture of the organization and how the culture of an organization can actually have an impact on situations like this.
Well, Amrita, one deduction would be that the overall culture and performance of the organization is a rather slow-moving one. So things might take longer to get done than the usual. Obviously, from the example we've got, we don't know if there has been something between the manager and the manager of the Blue Branch, and more or less things were raised or settled or brought to their attention. However, again, having in mind that a specific company has in place appropriate internal whistleblowing procedures, there should have been a direct feedback to Andrea from the manager, showing that her reference, her report, let's call it like that, was well received and it was under examination, and there should have been some sort of a feedback. I don't know if the overall culture is that we don't want to stir a lot the waters for something that might not be so significant, which could be the case. But anyway, if someone were to pursue an appropriate procedure for these matters, would have expected within a reasonable period of time to have some feedback. If not, then that person, Andrea in this case, could consider taking, elevating her actions. Someone could also consider that what happens in the specific department, specific branch, the Blue Branch, might have an impact on her own advancement, payments, progression within the company, evaluation at the end of the day. So someone could also argue that the fact that the Blue Branch is allowed to work in that manner and show better results than the others has an indirect discrimination, I would call it like that, against her own advancement within the company. So this could be an additional factor in speaking up, in making things a bit more publicly, moving on, as we've seen before, to the area manager. And always, as it was mentioned earlier by Stéphanie as well, before taking the next step, always measure your risks, obtain advice, and act through the through the process, knowing where you're going at. So yeah, the overall culture of the company, as I mentioned a second before, might be that of not taking immediate actions or keeping things, let's say, a lower profile rather than dealing with them at first instance. So my guess, if I were in Andrea's position, was to either go back to my manager and ask if something happened. If no response, then would need to elevate it, having obviously taken beforehand an appropriate advice. And usually the contact point or the whistleblowing hub within such companies falls within the task of either the internal legal advisor or any other senior person within the company. So that would also mean that there should have been some clear guidance and advice to her before moving it further.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm going to just see how we voted. So everybody in the call right now has decided to continue with option A, to report her concerns using the confidential whistleblowing line, which is actually, one of the obviously more popular options in the first round. Stephanie, if I could come to you, I really want to speak about reputation. When we have issues within organizations, one of the main things that we have to sometimes isn't even considered is reputational damage. And in this context, if it came out that certain individuals were not complying with policy, that can have an impact on the bank's reputation, and it can have reputational damage. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? And do you have any other examples or situations where you think, certain times where this can be a deterrent to individuals actually raising a concern?
Thank you, Amrita. Yes, this is a valid point and valid question. I think that we need to go back to the importance of training everyone involved, and particularly in conflict management, but also in professional ethics and integrity. And that includes being able to assess the risk to reputation of the organization. Here you have a clear example of a chain of events that leads to more unethical behavior within the same organization. And one more piece of advice I would give to Andrea, in addition to what Kyriakos said, by the way, I also voted for whistleblowing at this point, is that everything that is happening needs to be kept in records. So record keeping is essential, and it's directly relevant to what you're saying now about reputational damage. I wanted to say a few things about some at this stage, now that we are almost entirely sure that the reporting should be done somehow, sooner or later, via the official firm's confidential whistleblowing hotline or email address. I wanted to ask, or I wanted to perhaps invite our participants to think about how serious the breach can be in this case in the workplace. So are we looking at any potential violation of the firm's policy? Are we looking at something that we believe, in our honest belief, that is actually quite serious breach? And of course, the more events they are in the chain, the more likely it is that the breach is going to become serious. The second question that we should also wonder, since many of us are regulated professionals, is if we are subject to mandatory reporting requirements, which again has to do with the reputational damage, but also has to do with confidentiality and the duty of confidentiality if you are a regulated professional. So again, there is a dilemma here as a professional. One thing is for sure is that the whistleblower should not be carrying the burden of reporting on as one of disloyalty to their colleagues, to their managers, or to the organization as such, because you would expect that the organization should have an open reporting culture. So we go back to the culture of the organization regarding all types of misconduct, whether it's harassment, discrimination, bad ethical behavior, breach of policy, including by managers by not reporting on events, for example. So there should be a structure for voicing your concern, such as a hotline, for example, or external procedures as well. And if there isn't such a thing, then in all likelihood, the potential reputational damage to the organization, if this leaks, is increasing. I also wanted to say that it's always possible to report to an external body, whether these are perhaps lawyers or accountants or specific agencies that are dealing with whistleblowing. And that the risk assessment, as we said before, needs to be ongoing. So it's not just when I take the decision between, for example, Kyriakos said, first I use D. I go back to my manager, I ask for accounts, and then if I'm not satisfied that something will happen or that something has happened, then I go to A. At this point, again, there needs to be a risk assessment. Particularly at this point, anyone needs to be able to assess the unavoidable and unintended on the part of the whistleblower breach of any internal policy, because the whistleblower will actually potentially put themselves into a situation of breaching themselves internal policies, such as the duty of confidentiality, for example, that we mentioned just before. Or is there potential unintentional breach of regulatory requirements if you are a regulated professional in making the disclosure to an external body? So a whistleblower, a potential whistleblower, should consider if they can put themselves under the protection of applicable whistleblowing legislation. And it should come at this point before you actually decide what you're going to do. But here we are talking about internal whistleblowing process. In this case, you also need to think about how you're going to resist the pressure, resist any bullying that may take place within the organization, but also outside of the organization if this spreads, particularly via social media and other forms of media. So it takes a good dose of moral courage to be able to stir up and uphold the speak up culture. Thank you.
Some really interesting, especially key words as well that you've mentioned, moral courage. That's very important, especially when we're looking at speaking up. And it's something that we say that, is required by everybody, really. I think moral courage for those who are speaking up, but also moral courage for those who are actually listening up as well. I think one of the conclusions from this dilemma specifically is, the importance of that listening up process. The first dilemma that we saw an individual who was raising the first part of the dilemma is someone who's raising the concern and actually speaking up. And now this part really highlights the importance of the opposite side, the listening up. And one of the things to take away from that is communication is key. Within organizations and within the process, if there isn't a good line of communication, then it makes it much more difficult for there actually be a positive ending in the process, and for actually others to also join in that whistleblowing journey should they need to. So our second dilemma, and thank you for everyone that voted, is called transfer authorized. Now, this dilemma is based on Francis, and Francis has completed nearly a year of his first job in a small branch of a bank, which he joined straight after school. His recent appraisal says that he performed well and shows great potential. Accordingly, he's not surprised to be told that the branch manager, Christine, wishes to speak to him. Christine congratulates Francis on his performance and says that although, as a rule, staff are not able to participate in the bank's bonus scheme until they've completed 12 months of service, Francis, on the other hand, has done very well. She hands him an envelope saying because of the special nature of the payment and the bank's rule on bonuses generally, he must ensure that he doesn't discuss it with anyone. Francis feels a bit embarrassed and to have been singled out, but is pleased to have made a good impression. Francis opens the envelope and is surprised to read that 500 euros have been transferred into his account. It's some personal recognition of his good performance. And Christine told Francis not to mention the award to anyone, but he feels unable to keep it to himself. So he texts his friend Dan, whom he then meets, who he has met on the bank induction course, suggesting that they meet for a drink. At these drinks, Francis tells Dan about the bonus, and Dan really starts to question whether it was a mistake, as bonuses are limited this year. Francis shows Dan the letter, and it starts to look as though Christine has given Francis the money out of her own pocket. Dan says that the payment might also be against the bank's policy, as it could imply all sorts of things, but Francis says that he's sure that he's done nothing wrong and suggests that they just talk about something else, anything else. Francis wonders whether he should raise the matter with somebody in the branch, and if so, whom? He also wonders whether he should perhaps phone the helpline number that he was given on his induction, but he is unsure whom he will be talking to and whether it will get back to Christine that he actually called. So we have an individual, Francis, who's been basically given 500 euros by his Christine, and it seems as though this money was given directly from her as a bonus. Bonuses within this dilemma aren't really for people who are just within their 12-month probation period. And whilst he is surprised, and whilst his friend is surprised, he's raised that with his friend, what do you think he should do? So I open up the voting. Should he, option A, approach Christine directly to clarify the situation and return the bonus? Option B, notwithstanding that he's been told not to discuss it with anyone, should he report it to whoever is responsible for HR matters at the branch? Option C, call their staff helpline and raise the matter. Or option D, do nothing. He was quite fortunate to have even received a bonus, and he should just, almost just keep it. So just as a reminder, if you'd like to vote, you can scan the QR code on the left and it will take you to the direct website page, or you could just log on to slido.com and in the reference box, put in the code CISI. I can see the votes already coming through. Now, within this dilemma, what we can see is quite different from the other dilemmas. Is Francis he's already spoken to someone. In the previous dilemmas, the individuals didn't really raise a concern with anyone, and within this one, Francis has actually spoken to someone who he trusts, and this is Dan, and he raises that he almost raises the issue to speak to somebody about it. Kyriakos, I'm going to come to you on this one. What do you think is important within this dilemma for Francis to consider? So don't feel that you need to speak on any specific option, but within the dilemma, what do you think is important to consider?
Well, this dilemma takes, this example now takes the discussion a bit further from the previous one we've seen. Just to combine it, now we are focused in a banking institution with stricter policy rules. And here we see a breach of an internal policy by the manager, I would say this time. Francis did ask for some external advice. Probably he's in a very awkward situation himself in order to ascertain whether he should keep it, talk about it, or go back, as like the options we've got here to respond. It's it's getting a bit more complicated. Obtaining a friend's advice. The way it came out appears to be a good starting point. Again, having to exercise his moral courage, as it was mentioned before by Stéphanie correctly, he has to more or less take additional action thereon, possibly indeed seek some additional advice from a more relevant person, being some sort of a legal advice as well. The whole situation again if I were to relate it from the previous example, again goes back to how someone assesses and acknowledges the risk he's taking. However, this specific case again shows elements of being a bit more bizarre, in the sense that he's asked to keep everything silent, he's asked not to disclose anything, not to talk to anybody, etc. And the fact that the money is coming from her own bank accounts, from her own pocket, makes things a bit more peculiar, I would say, a bit more curious. So by just doing nothing and accepting the transfer might put him in a more awkward situation in the event of any other future events that he might be involved with. Well, this is a case that Francis needs to obtain, needs to look at the company's policies, ethical guidelines, and his own or his professional bodies, if he's got one, guidance rules. And before making the next step, he needs to clarify the ethical part of accepting a bonus, not directly from the bank, but directly from his supervisor, his superior. So he needs to evaluate his way forward before he takes the next step.
Thank you. Just before I go to you, Stephanie, I'm just going to see how people have voted. So attendees feel that option A is the best course of action, to approach Christine directly to clarify the situation and return the bonus. Nobody really voted for option D, to do nothing. So everybody feels like something should be done. And then almost an equal number for option B and C, between speaking to HR and raising the concern. Stephanie, approaching Christine directly to clarify the situation is quite a bold move. I wonder if you can speak on the difficulties maybe within organizations when you've got junior members of staff who want to raise a concern, and how that has an impact, depending on your level of experience with an organization, or even experience in industry. How can that have an impact on you as an individual and your whistleblowing process, should you wish to raise a concern?
Yes, thank you, Amrita. Well, here we have a clear example of an uneven situation where you've got a supervisor and someone who came straight from school, got into the bank, has been there for just a few months, and therefore there is a lack probably of there is a difference in the level of knowledge of how things function in the bank. And the other thing we can say about this very awkward indeed situation is that the person who is Francis, or in the position of Francis, may be accused of anything else if that person reports it directly to HR, for example, which is option B. So Francis is in a situation where probably there will be, if he reports it, there will be some sort of investigation, because that's absolutely not right within a bank. And he may face consequences that he not only cannot anticipate, but also probably cannot even control, outside of his control. And probably the less experienced you are, the newer you are to a profession, the more likely you are to fall into that trap of basically not being able to assess properly the consequences, and find yourself into a vicious circle. A vicious cycle of situations. I think this is probably what Francis exposes himself to. Hence, option A would seem to make more sense, but that doesn't mean that option A will not lead to unintended or unavoidable consequences. For example, the supervisor not taking it well and making his life miserable thereon. And if such a scenario then unfolds, what is left for Francis to do? I mean, so the choice is between reporting now under B, let's say, or reporting later. But if you report later, how are you going to justify and explain the fact that you actually hadn't reported initially? So how are you going to explain that actually you did nothing to create this situation? You promised nothing, you did nothing wrong, but nevertheless, you did not report it. So the awareness of the whistleblowing process within the organization, but also the need for training and adherence to internal policies of the workplace is very important, particularly as soon as new staff comes in, because they are not likely to know, and they are not likely to take the right decision in such an example. And this is something that we perhaps could, be again to turn against themselves, and is in a sort of a boomerang effect. And this is valid in every profession.
Yeah. And it also goes on to the conversation of trust. Who is it that you trust when you are starting at an organization? There are your circle is very small. The individuals that you trust, you don't really know yet. And so within this dilemma, Francis has spoken to Dan and he trusts Dan. So Kyriakos, if I could come to you, whilst we're not looking at Dan in this dilemma, do you think now that there is a responsibility for Dan to do something? He's been told information that maybe he just doesn't agree with, and maybe he sees something that's not right. And whilst this part of the dilemma isn't focused on, do you think any of the onus sits with Dan?
Yeah, well, I'll start from what Stephanie pointed out in her intervention, which I think is very important in this case. Francis and presumably Dan, since they've met at the induction course, are very new staff members of the bank. Probably not still novices, still trying to have their to complete their first year in order to be, let's say, acknowledged as regular staff members of the bank. So, which indeed makes the situation a bit worse. The other thing is that usually in these cases, being a new entrant in a bigger organization, you tend to see your supervisor as a bit your role model from some perspectives, and possibly at least for quite some time you will look at them, will look up at them and trusting their good will and their good practices. The lack of experience in such incidences by someone who has just come from school without probably any additional university education or any other professional qualification in this case makes things a bit more curious and problematic for Francis. And the other thing is that, as Stéphanie mentioned, which is very, very true, being on some sort of a probation, I would say, probationary period, it means that following a approach directly might not be taken very well from Christine, and therefore the poor lad might suffer of possibly some vindictive behavior by the supervisor. Vindictive in terms of moving away or not, let's say, going well in the next period that they will be working together. So I'm not sure if Dan, assuming that he's the same level like Francis would do something else. Again, we go back in order to, we need to have in mind what the internal processes and culture within this bank are regarding whistleblowing or reporting procedures. And if I were a bit provocative enough, I could also consider, which is something that usually it's done at early stages, what Christine did was to test France's ethical boundaries with this example. So it's yes, it's a double-edged dagger what you will do going forward. However, well, Dan could elevate it into without making any references and disclosing names and precise situation further up the company, further up the bank, you know, as a query, see what he could get as a result, as a response on that. So it's I'm not really convinced that Dan would be in a different position than Francis in this case, given that they more or less share the same characteristics. Francis would need to reconsider quite thoroughly his options and possibly would try to clarify, possibly following option A in the question here with Christine first, and then see what he can do further.
Thank you for that. We've had a question come in, and Stephanie, I'll put this one to yourself. So in this dilemma, we've obviously got 500 euros that have been transferred, but how different would it be, or would it be any different if it was more or less money, if it was 50 euros, if it was 5,000 euros, and even in comparison to something else like a lunch or you know, a voucher for dinner or something? Do you think that the outcome would be any different?
Thank you, Amrita. Well, going out for lunch or for dinner, or, you know, exchanging socially with your supervisor is obviously not something that is prohibitive or something that would be regarded as improper, I would say. And it could be one of the motivations of Christine, you know, who perhaps would be looking for a more social relationship with Francis, but that is probably not the right way to express it. So I'm less worried about social engagements outside of the bank. However, when it comes to money, and knowing what we know in terms of bonuses being scarce and not distributed and allocated easily, and obviously being allocated centrally in the sense that, you know, it must be merit-based somehow, and it must be also done by a process, and that process by definition should be a fair process, equal process, and transparent and due process as much as possible. So giving that amount of money, and of course the more money the worse, giving that amount of money to someone who hasn't gone through that process begs the question of the motivation, and of course begs the question as to whether we are indeed looking into some type of bribery or corruption, not to mention theft, because we don't know exactly where Christine got the money from. So even if it was a smaller amount, the issue would still arise because this is not a proper process. So this is outside every possible process of the bank, unless supervisors have been given the authority and the discretion to give somehow a small bonus, but then the rest of the facts do not sit well with that hypothesis. The fact that she told him not to mention anything to anyone, I mean, that indicates more secrecy. So in my view, yes, even if the amount was smaller, we would still have the same considerations. And the bigger the amount, the more suspicious it becomes. And the more suspicious in terms of bad practices it becomes.
Thank you for that. Really helpful. So we're going to be moving on to our final dilemma, which is called In a Hole. And we've got Maria and Brandon, who work for a sales team at Max Bank, and they share a line manager. The team is known for its supportive culture and positive working environment. Brandon is particularly popular, and when Maria joined the firm, they formed a close friendship. Maria is invited to a dinner party at Brandon's house, and she's the only person from Max Bank in attendance. After dinner, Brandon brags about the extravagant upcoming trip to the Ryder Cup golf tournament at the invitation of a potential client. Maria overhears some of the details, but as she's not interested in golf, she leaves the conversation to talk to other guests. Now, a couple of weeks pass, and Brandon has a day out of the office, which Maria assumes is to attend the event. Soon after, Maria passes Brandon's office and she overhears him on the phone, promising unusual favorable commissions to a new client. Her thoughts immediately turn to the client who organized the Ryder Cup event, and she becomes concerned when Brandon says, "Don't worry, I took the day's holiday, so my boss won't even know where I was." Maria makes a hasty retreat as she doesn't want Brandon to think that she was eavesdropping. So within this dilemma, Maria feels worried about what she's overheard and wants to reflect on the options that are available to her. So she's overheard some information about her colleague who potentially went to an event by a potential client on a day off that maybe wasn't declared and she doesn't know. So there are some options of what you think Maria should do next. So should she confront Brandon on what she overheard? Option B, Maria has no proof of any wrongdoing, so she should just really do nothing. Should she speak to their shared line manager, even though this may impact the team morale and camaraderie? Or should she report her concerns to Max Bank whistleblowing hotline? Again, I will open up the voting to see what the conversation is within the group. But one of the things that's different within this dilemma is there's no facts. We kind of spoke about facts at the beginning. There's nothing that we know. It's based off of information that you've heard. It's based off of hearsay almost. And it's, Brandon who was gifted the event potentially. He didn't potentially declare it. Potentially has gained a new client and maybe potentially giving that client more commission than would be usual. I'm going to go to you, Stephanie, first, if I can. Now, it's quite difficult raising a concern in general. And sometimes it's even difficult when you're raising a concern about someone who you actually have a friendship with. How can this be seen as sometimes a deterrent? And within your experience or your awareness of the issues, have you ever seen something like this? And can you comment on anything on it?
Thank you, Amrita. The line was not very good, but I think I caught what you wanted. Yes, I mean, of course, we are exposed to such, more or less, to such situations in our daily life. I mean, it's important to have a very good working relationship with colleagues, whether they are within your department, whether they are in other departments, whether they are your line managers or the management or actually other type of staff. It's very important to have a very collegial relationship with them. On the other hand, it's true that if you happen to develop a more friendly relationship with colleagues or one colleague, then there is the potential risk of what happens in case not you overhear, because for me overhearing is not sufficient, but in case you realize that there is a pattern of unethical behavior. So depending on the relationship and depending on the work relationship you have, you will take action or not take action. So in this working relationship between Mary and Brendan, both of them are the same level. They are colleagues, they work together, they do the same thing more or less, and they do it well together. So it's a different situation if you have an employee and a line manager. The line manager ought to take some action. And it could be that this action would be to talk to the person. It could start with this. However, I mentioned before that I believe in the training, at least of line managers, but I would say of all employees if possible, in holding difficult discussions, or conflict management, we call it sometimes. There are a number of methods that are available and that are very suited for businesses and other commercial organizations, whereby you can have group activities and you can learn to talk to each other despite the difficulties. You may be under a lot of pressure at work. You may disagree on the way forward. You may be looking after the same customer, the same client, which could be the case here, that Maria and Brandon are actually looking to expand their clientele towards the same direction. And it would be important to be able to hold a difficult discussion. Now, as I said before, overhearing is probably not enough. I mean, okay, we are not holding a legal webinar, and of course we have had already discussions that were non-legal, because of course if you look at things, you must be much more careful if you look at them in a legal context, in the sense that you can certainly not assume things until they have been proven. So in my view, overhearing conversations doesn't mean that there is any particular wrongdoing. However, that doesn't mean that a conversation could not be held between the two, and it may become a difficult conversation or a confrontational discussion. And employees should be equipped for that. And this is the role of the organization, to make sure that this is the case.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. I'm just going to see what the temperature in the meeting is. So we've got 44% for option D. Most people think that Maria should report her concerns to the whistleblowing hotline. Then we have people think that Maria should speak to her line manager, even though it might impact the team morale. 90% feel that Maria should confront Brandon, and some people even think that while she's got no proof, she should just do nothing. Kyriakos, I'm just going to come to you now. What, if any, implication do you think that the size of the organization has? We don't know within this dilemma what max bank is. Is it a small organization? Is it a large organization? But sometimes sometimes it can be more obvious who has actually raised that concern than you'd like it to be, because maybe there's only a handful of individuals in the organization. Do you have any comments on that? And can you speak on how the impact of or the size of an organization can sometimes have an impact on the process?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Amrita. Firstly, I would like to continue from where Stephanie left the discussion. I think she's right in my opinion, in how she described the situation. And given the facts that we have from the example that the specific organization has a friendly internal environment and facilitates relationships between staff. It's important to see how the two colleagues there, Brandon and Maria, are related apart from being colleagues during working time, and if they've got some more closer friendly relationship, which possibly exists given that she has been invited to a party, and that the fact that Brandon didn't hide the fact that he would go to the event, the Wolf event, on his normal annual, taking one of his annual leave days and go there. So he didn't have any problem mentioning that, which could suggest that the relationship was good enough, and therefore possibly Maria would need to talk to her friend in order to see if he's doing something wrong, or if he does, to deter him from continuing. So with regards to your question, indeed, we don't know the size of the organization, we don't know the size of the client, we don't know how dependent the business, the bank is on the specific client. But apparently, Brandon is on the phone here talking to a second client. So the question here is if there's going to be a domino effect affecting other colleagues as well, or him expanding his, let's say, practice of having a more personal relationship with the clients, facilitating them with their banking requirements, offering them commissions if he's an introducer or if he's a good client of theirs. The problem from a small one, which could have been killed easily in the first instance, could grow up to be an avalanche event, which cannot be contained at the end of the day. So it's not clear, so we don't have all that information, but sometimes we need to think a bit further down the road. I would undoubtedly agree with Stéphanie that the company, the bank, given its, let's say, friendly type of culture, has to invest in training the staff in dealing with these situations. Probably the bank has a conflict of interest directive or an anti-bribery, consider that as well, or taking gifts, as we've seen in the previous example, and needs to convey these messages to all staff and encourage them in meeting them. It's a cultural issue, it's a control issue as well, and ultimately it's a governance issue. How it's not just an HR issue, it's another governance issue, how the bank monitors the exercise of their employees, how their employees exercise their duties with their clients. I also share the same view with Stéphanie that what we have is 2 phone calls, so we don't have any real evidence. But yeah, we might. Someone has to consider that, despite the fact that it's still hearsays, possibly there is some real substance beneath that, and should be under the lens of someone looking at how specific clients or specific staff members are dealing with their clients. So it might be one of events, but it could be more than that, and the client would be of more significance for the bank rather than just a simple company working with the bank.
Thank you very much, and thank you to you both for really raising various issues, dilemmas, parts within the dilemma that are really important. I think, moving on from those dilemmas, what is quite important to focus on, whilst we have spoken about the speak up aspect, is the listen up and the opposite side almost. There are very many positives of listening up when you're being when someone is raising a concern to you, and understand really how intimidating that can be. Make time for individuals who are raising a concern to you, understand the facts, and we spoke a lot about really the facts of the case, and sometimes you don't always have all of the facts. Sometimes things are, as some of these dilemmas have been, just things that you've heard. Reporting confidentiality, keeping calm, and seeking advice. Now, there are some things that people should not do. Specifically, don't shoot the messenger, don't put the blame game on. You don't always rely on hearsay, suspicion, or gossip. Reporting anonymously, one of the difficulties around this is you can't go back to the individual and actually give them an update on where their concern is, and try and not make erratic decisions. Easier sometimes said than done. Now, we've spoken about the various types of ways that individuals can speak up, and in many of the dilemmas that we've seen, most of the cases, one of the most important things to do is to raise that concern with the line manager. Always, especially if we know within the first instance, they actually have a responsibility to listen, to respond in the way that's important, and sometimes it's easier to keep that audit trail. So, it can be a situation where you speak to them, but then you also follow up via email, and you also follow up with an audit trail. Should that not be the case, or should you have completed that, then it might be a case of raising it with the senior manager or HR, and then accordingly elsewhere, whether that's an executive director, chief executive, chairman, or some organizations even have an independent director. The CISI Code of Conduct was updated in 2021, and we actually have a specific principle that looks at speaking up and listen up, and to be active in speaking up and encouraging others to do so by listening up. We want to continue to promote that safe environment for everyone, and recognizing the responsibilities that you have to communities in which you operate. So it is at this point that I will leave you there. So thank you very much. A special thank you to Stéphanie and Kyriakos, because it's been really, really helpful, and hopefully everyone has found the discussion and the points raised within the discussion helpful. I will stop sharing my screen, and Petros, I'll hand to you.
Actually, Amrita, please keep your screen. If you care to just hold that screen, that's fine. So thank you to everyone. Amrita, thank you for leading us so well through the different dilemmas. And thank you, Stéphanie and Kyriakos, for adding so much extra food for thought and insight and wisdom into how to deal with that particular situation. Of course, thank you to everyone who was on the poll and contributing their thoughts. Just some takeaways from me. I have nothing more to add in terms of substance of what we've heard already, but some takeaways for me. Obviously, it's not easy to get speak up, listen up right. And there are different ways of doing it, and good people can disagree. We saw some of the ranges in the answers to the polls, and everyone had a valid point, I'm sure. If they were asked to explain why they chose one of the options over the other, there's a valid reason. So for me, one of the major takeaways is we have to do this carefully and thoughtfully. And we need support from our organization. And I think that support comes from clear policy, systems, and processes in order to facilitate speaking up in a way that is constructive. And speaking up and listening up, of course, that's the other side of the equation, which we should always be encouraging as well. Doesn't only have to be when it's a crisis situation. It shouldn't be a nuclear button option where you speak up only when something is going horribly wrong, but the culture of speaking up on an ongoing basis, asking questions, constructively challenging. I think that is a real good cultural gauge in terms of whether or not this organization that we're with, that we're part of, actually really believes in walking with integrity and doing things the way in which we should be doing. And as someone who is in the position to speak up, or someone who's in the position to listen up, always do it judiciously and respectfully for everyone involved, but never compromise your values. And this is why, Amrita, I was hoping that you did hold this page, because we at the CISI, we try to help our members establish what is that North Star in the storm that we can fix our gaze on and actually make sure that we are heading in the right direction. And these are the things that we can see here, always being clear and honest, impartial and open, straightforward and transparent, and be informed and fair. And I think these are guiding principles or values that as we navigate the complexity of speaking up and listening up correctly, then these things can help us. And ultimately, for what it's worth, unless you have to be in an organization because you have no choice, if you feel that there isn't a healthy speak up, listen up culture, it's always good to try to find an exit as soon as possible, because at the end of the day, you will find yourself in a compromised position, and it's always better to be in an organization that promotes speaking up and listening up rather than one that doesn't. And these days, part of our ESG credentials is to make sure that we have a good, healthy working environment for our employees, and that we're serving our wider stakeholder base properly, which includes speaking up and listening up. So with that, are we having an open Q&A session, Amrita, or are we timed out? Have we reached our time limit?
I mean, this would be the time limit, but yeah, no, Stephanie.
Stephanie has a hand up.
Sorry, yes, but you know, I'm an academic, so I cannot avoid. You know, if you allow me to give a few more thoughts, if that's okay. And also because we perhaps have professionals who are collecting CPD points, and that's worth 2 hours. So if we can extend it a little bit more, I think it's good. Amrita, if you don't mind, I also noticed when I was doing my research that not only does the CISI has this code of conduct that you just spoke about, but I also took the trouble of reading the whistleblowing policy of the CISI. So I just wanted to raise this as well, that there is a very good template, very good example of whistleblowing policy that you can find on Google by just Googling CISI whistleblowing policy. I would like also to say a few words about two things. First of all, to come back to the fact that many of us are regulated professions. And I'm taking the lawyers as an example because this is the one I know best, but I'm sure that Kyriakos can take the accountants as another example. And I wanted to say a few things about the materials from the Law Society that are very helpful as well, as much as the CISI is helpful. And come back to what Petros said, which is very general advice on how we can all uphold the rule of law, principles, good governance, whether public or private, and the administration of justice. Particularly, we should make sure that we enhance trust and confidence in our respective professions, because we're also representatives of our respective professions, and we need to be aware of this. Independence, honesty, integrity, respect for equality, diversity, and inclusion, which we have not spoken about yet, and also having the best interest not only of our clients or customers at stake, but actually also the best interest of the general public, of society at stake. I think it's very important. And I finally wanted to bring to everyone's attention the fact that there is an EU whistleblowing directive, which makes a very good read. It makes a very good read because, first of all, within the European Union, it must be implemented. And this is why the Republic of Cyprus equipped itself finally with the whistleblowing legislation. Amrita mentioned the president of the House of Representatives. There was a package of anti-corruption measures passed in Parliament in February 2022. And in that package, you can find the whistleblowing legislation, which is the implementation of the directive. But I'm mentioning the directive because it puts things into perspective. We spoke a lot about internal reporting and external reporting, and the directive makes the difference between internal reporting provisions, obligations, and external reporting obligations. I would like also to remind everyone that actually the reporting obligations, the external ones, they are the internal ones, sorry, they are actually imposed on any public or private organization. So it concerns both the public and the private sectors, which is something that we have not mentioned yet. So there are procedures for internal reporting, for external reporting. There are procedures for public disclosures. This is something we have not really discussed either, although we did mention that, you know, there can be reputation damage. And the directive also provides the duty of confidentiality. So there is a recognition that, you know, there is, of course, confidentiality and that it plays a big role. Also, the protection of personal data, which plays a big role. And this is something that is relevant to all the examples we had in front of us, all the scenarios. Amrita mentioned the audit trail. And I mentioned before the, you know, record keeping. That's exactly what we mean. It's the same thing. It's very important to keep trace of what you actually reported or meant to report, and have an audit trail. You're right about that. And there are another couple of provisions that are important in the directive. There is one on the prohibition of retaliation, which is something that we have discussed now. So I encourage you to read that provision. And there is also a whole section, a long section on support to whistleblowers. So I just wanted to bring this up. If you need the number of the directive, this is Directive 1937 of 2019. On the protection of persons who report breaches of union law. But of course, breaches of union law is extremely widely defined, and is applicable in all the member states of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Do we have any other questions from people who are joining us to put in the chat box, and we can just field them to our panelists? So I don't see any coming through. Kyriakos, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just to compliment on Stephanie's, I think, very important comments as presented. Indeed, speaking from the accountancy profession, we are bound by our code of ethics, which is based on 5 plus 1, I would say, fundamental principles, being those of integrity, objectivity, professional competence, which is also very important, professional behavior, and of course, confidentiality. The plus 1 is the independence from the on how we do serve clients and how we exercise our duties. So the regulated professions are bound by the code of ethics. It's something that we do look at for our members when we review them. We also have our own procedures for any disciplinary action against members not doing their work correctly. Given now and having in mind Petros' slides with the statistics you've presented before, yeah, there is, I would say, a strong perception in Cyprus that there is a problem with the corruption, hence the passing of the legislations last year. 3 pieces of legislation aiming towards the same goal: the authority for combating corruption, the whistleblowing law, and the law regulating lobbyists. So we are taking gradual, eventually, steps towards enhancing the legal environment. What needs to be done, both through all of us here, the academics, the professional bodies, consultants, and anyone else who's here, is to try and build a culture where integrity would prevail, honesty would prevail, and of course, proper and ethical acts upon anything. So it's important now, given that we've got legislation, in place to work it out. Still, the regulations pursuant to the legislation haven't yet been completed by the parliaments. There's still some legislatory act that has to be done. But I think, given that we had this series of presentations on governance touching upon various more specialized issues, is the way forward in order to pass on the message. So it's important for us to speak up, not to disclose or bring any wrongdoing up, but to be there and advocate for the necessity for a better society, a better economy at the end of the day through an appropriate and proper and ethical behavior by everybody from our side or from the clients, etc. And for the businesses to start preparing their own whistleblowing policies. Yeah, Stéphanie is right. Every public or private company entity has to have in place specific procedures and policy. And although the law stipulates that companies in excess of 50 staff are mandatory to have such processes, it strongly suggests that every single company should do it as well. So it's important in order to engage into a new sort of culture. It's not wrong to have good relationship with staff or clients or whoever else. It's part of business anyway. But yeah, we need to know our boundaries and we need to know how we take the next step. And concluding, I would like us, the participants and the organizers, to continue this endeavor of educating, updating, and providing information to businesses, to other members of our society, and from their side to demand a proper and ethical behavior by everybody. Also, the law also stipulates, the local law stipulates that there should be free guidance by the state. Yeah, we still need to see how things will get into place, and hopefully we will have a more robust anti-corruption environment in the country as well, and in the business sector. So that's from me, Petros, and I would like to congratulate UCLan for the initiative and also CSI for their most valuable input they had.
Thank you, Kyriakos. Stephanie, that's a new hand up, I think, not from your last comment.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's just a few words of thank you from me as well, because we really had a wonderful CBD webinar series, and it wouldn't have been possible without the support of the CISI, so I want to thank them as well, and also without the support of ICPAC, so thank you, Kyriakos. Support from Petros personally, but also from Kyriakos, who I don't think is with us tonight. We were working on this series with Petros and Kyriakos for over a year, so we are very pleased that it has come to fruition, and it's been fruitful for everyone. And if you are particularly interested in Cyprus, and I was looking at the list of participants and I saw that quite a few people probably from Cyprus, and following up on what Kyriakos said, and on the data that Petros actually showed us, displayed at the very beginning. I mentioned at the beginning the Center of Excellence for the Rule of Law and European Values, which we run. It's an EU-funded project which runs at the Law School of UCLan Cyprus. The website is CROLEV, CROLEV.eu. And actually, what we do at CROLEV is exactly this. We measure via a list of indicators which we have created or produced ourselves via methodology. We measure the state of the rule of law and other democratic values in Cyprus. So if you are interested in following what we are doing, because we are using existing indicators, existing data, and complementing them, you're very welcome to check the website. And I'm open so that, you know, we may create new series of webinars. CROLEF has its own webinar series and courses and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we come up with something new with the CISI. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye from me. There were comments in the chat that were very positive. So thank you for that too.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone. And just finally, I would like to say just one or two things. Thank you to UCLan. Thank you to ICPAC. This was a real collaboration, a real partnership. And I think that's the lesson to learn, that if we're going to make a change and flip that Edelman Trust barometer, rather than financial services being at the bottom, but being at the top, we need to work together. And when I say together, I mean as individuals, as professionals, as academics. If we all pull together all the different professional bodies and actually be the change we seek in others and set the example and be the champions. This series was a series of good governance and how good governance can be used to fight corruption. And ISO 31000, which came out just under 18 months ago, actually, I think added a very good dimension to the definition of governance and says that governance is a human-based system. And I think that's the key. Governance in and of itself, we can have the best laws, regulations, policies, systems, processes, but it relies on people doing the right thing. And that is up and down the organization and left and right to the organization. So there's safety in numbers, and it is difficult to sometimes go against the grain and speak up and push back. We've spoken about that already. We need that moral courage to do so. But we do take comfort when we are part of a wider group, a professional body, a team, and we know we have that moral support. So I'll leave by thanking everyone again, great participation, and look forward to the next time we're together. Have a good evening and take care. Bye-bye.